Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Greek Spinach Rice. That's right, I am very excited to be sharing my take on Spanakorizo, which even if you're a fan of Greek food, you might not be that familiar with, which is something I'd love to change since this really is amazing. And while this is certainly delicious enough to enjoy on its own, it also works wonderfully as a side dish, which I'm going to show you at the end of the video as I give you a sneak preview of the next recipe. So stay tuned for that, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started by showing you what we need to make this. Beginning with one of the stars of the show, some spinach. And what I have here is 1 pound of frozen chopped spinach that I thawed and squeezed out very well. And yes, of course we can use fresh, but the frozen is so much easier and less expensive and I think works better. And then besides that, we'll need some rice. And if you can find it, a medium grain works the best. And I'm using one called Kale Rose, but really any white rice will do. And then the rest of our vegetation will include some sliced green onions, also known in some parts as scallions. Plus we need a whole bunch of fresh dill. And yes, chopping up some of the stems is fine. And then we'll also need a whole bunch of freshly picked mint leaves. And these herbs really are one of the keys to the recipe, so don't leave them out. And then just as importantly, we're going to want some fresh lemons to squeeze over the top later. And other than some nice Greek olive oil and some salt, pepper, and cayenne, that is going to be it for all the mandatory ingredients. And as soon as we get our herbs chopped up nice and fine, we can head to the stove to start this very simple recipe. And what we'll do is pour our Greek olive oil into a saucepan that we have set over medium-high heat. And we'll go ahead and dump in our rice, and we will start stirring. And we will keep stirring until every grain of rice is coated with that oil, and we hear it start to sizzle. Okay, we don't want to brown it, but we do want to hear it start to sing. And once we do hear that rice start to sizzle, we can stop and toss in our salt, pepper, and cayenne, as well as our green onions. And we'll go ahead and stir that in and cook that for about a minute. At which point we can carefully add in all the rest of the ingredients, which will include our dill and mint that we finely chopped. And by the way, if your herbs turn black when you chop them, your knife is dull. Take your knife out and get it sharpened, because you're not slicing your herbs, you're crushing them. So stop crushing them. And then we'll also go ahead and toss in our spinach, followed by a very precise measurement of cold fresh water. Or if you wanted some chicken broth, but I thought I'd throw my vegetarian friends a bone, or should I say throw them a twig, and keep this meatless. But anyway, we'll dump that in, and then we'll take a spoon and give this a thorough mixing while we wait for it to come up to a simmer. And please take your time here and mix this well. Okay, we want that spinach and rice mixed very uniformly so that the rice cooks evenly. So we will definitely do that. And like I said, we'll wait for this to come to a simmer, which always starts happening first around the outside, around the outside, around the outside. And then once that does start to bubble enthusiastically and looks like this, we will cover that tightly and reduce our heat to medium-low, at which point we'll let this simmer for exactly 25 minutes, assuming that is we're using medium grain rice. Okay, if you use long grain rice, it might cook a little bit quicker, so you might have to check a few minutes earlier. But anyway, after 25 minutes, we'll take off the lid, and we'll turn off the heat, and we will give this a stir to make sure it's done, which we can do by tasting, of course. But as soon as I began stirring, I could tell this was perfect, meaning the grains were perfectly tender. And I know we usually do this step with a fork, and that's to avoid rubbing too much starch off the surface of the grain, which will make it start to get sticky. But that's exactly what we want here. All right, a little bit of that starch to come off the rice, which will give this a little more of a creamier texture. And also, that's why I prefer medium grain rice, which tends to cook up a little bit stickier than a long grain. And that's it. Once that's been stirred, we'll cover it back up, and we will simply let that sit with the heat off for about 5 minutes, during which time we can get our toppings ready. And after 5 minutes of resting, we will uncover it, and we will check it for seasoning, and it very well could need some more salt. But don't judge the final taste yet, because this is not really done until we top it with our lemon and feta. So I gave mine a taste, and decided I was ready to move into final assembly. So I went ahead and spooned that up in a bowl, and then used the tip of my spoon to make that top surface very feta friendly. But before that, for each serving, I think we want to squeeze on at least a half a lemon. And it's that acidity that really elevates all the other flavors here. Oh, and if you don't use fresh lemon and try to use some kind of concentrate, you should literally be put in jail, or at least community service picking lemons, since it really does need to be fresh juice here. And that's it. We'll go ahead and top this with our crumbled feta, with the type and exact amount being up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the Curtis Blow of your Spanakorizo. And speaking of the breaks, I'm going to break with tradition and top mine with some beautiful pickled red onions, which are simply made by slicing red onions and letting them soak in red vinegar overnight. And not only do I love the color, but I think it adds a nice contrast in both taste and texture. And then for 2 final touches, I tossed on a pinch of Aleppo chili flakes, which is optional, plus a nice drizzle of Greek olive oil, which is definitely not optional. And that's it. My take on Greek spinach rice was ready to enjoy. And that, my friends, is a truly magnificent rice dish, assuming that is it has enough salt and has enough fresh lemon juice and feta. And what I love so much about Greek cuisine, besides everything, is that the recipes are so simple and generally very easy, yet they produce such big, bold, complex flavors. And yes, in case you're wondering, this does taste a little like spanakopita, which is an amazing pastry made with spinach and feta and phyllo dough. And while not exactly the same or quite as rich, this would be a nice, fast, and easy way to get a very similar experience. And as I mentioned in the intro, I think this makes a very fine meal on its own, especially if you topped yours like I topped mine. But I think this would also make a beautiful side dish for so many things, whether it's a simple marinated grilled chicken breast, or maybe some beautiful lamb chops, or top with some Greek-style beef stew, which, yes, is going to be the next video. And while I don't think it's very traditional for that stew to be served on this rice, I think it is absolutely fantastic. But even if you don't pair them, that stew is insanely delicious, and I'm very excited to be showing you my version. So please stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I really do hope you give this Greek spinach rice a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always,